thought deeply about childhood poverty as well as inequality. And one of the pieces of that work that I think is important to share out with a larger audience is this work you did recently with Russell Sage around the growing inequality in early childhood access to opportunities as well as outcomes. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Dick Murnane and I were the co-conspirators in this project that involved a lot of other authors of an edited book that we did, and then we called Wither Opportunity that Russell Sage published, and then we did a book called Restoring Opportunity that was jointly published by Russell Sage and Harvard Education Press. And it was a very broad look over the last 40 years. We know that inequality has increased, income inequality has increased, and people had been focusing more on the kind of current generation impacts, but we were interested in to what extent growing inequality in the parent generation was being transmitted in terms of growing inequality in the children who were growing up in those families and going off on their own. And one of the authors of a chapter in the Wither Opportunity book, Sean Reardon, put together this amazing time series showing gaps between high and low income children in terms of test scores over the last 50 years. And what you found was this stark growth in the gap, earnings, in the achievement gap that increased by about 50% between 1965 or so and the early 2000s. And if you then look at gaps in college completion, for example, you get a similar kind of story. You know, it's a story where achievement levels of low-income kids are increasing. College completion rates of low-income kids are increasing, but the achievement growth and college completion growth for higher income kids is accelerating, right? So they're both making progress, but the progress at the top and the middle is much greater than the progress at the bottom, so that you have this growing gap.
And I thought one of the most striking figures was not just the growing gap in K-12 achievement and also college going, but that the gap in after-school supplementary enrichment opportunities.
Right. So the question is, how does income translate? How does growing income inequality translate into growing achievement inequality, right? And the evidence is somewhat circumstantial there, but one of the developments that is probably important is that at the time there's been growing income inequality, there's been growing residential segregation by income. So in the 2000s relative to 1970, poor kids are much more likely to be surrounded by poor kids. Middle class or rich kids are more likely to be surrounded by people in their social strata. And given the kind of local system of schooling that we have in the United States, where kids tend to attend neighborhood schools, that translates into schools increasingly concentrating either poor or affluent kids within the schools. So that is part of the dynamic. But another part that we discovered that you referred to, if you simply look at the amount that parents are spending out of their income on what you might think of as enrichment expenditures for their kids, things like childcare, lessons, summer camp, computers, vacations, those are opportunities for kids to be exposed to the outside world. In the early 70s, that gap in current dollars was about $3,800 being spent per child per year by the top 20%, 3,800 versus about 800. And if you roll forward to 10 years ago, that 800 had gone to about 1,300, an increase in per child per year expenditures. But the 3,000 figure had gone up to 10,000, right? So higher income families now are spending $10,000 per child per year on these enrichment expenditures.